When you think of France, you often think of food, art, culture, music, but you don't often think of photography aside from the famous photographer Henri Cartier-Bresson, or as we Pittsburghers would say, Henry Carter-Bresson. Just sort of kidding about that, but not really. Anyway, in this video, we're going to talk about a Foca camera, which was made by Société Optique et Précision de Levallois. I think I got that right. Otherwise known as OPL. It was a France-based manufacturer that produced optical and mechanical equipment. It made a series of 35 millimeter cameras, ranging from very simple scale focus viewfinder cameras to interchangeable lens rangefinder cameras. We're going to be looking specifically at the Foca Sport II. What's unusual about this camera and most of the Foca Sports, oh, wait a minute, I was wrong. I've been looking for an indication of what this model name is on the camera. For example, it's not marked here, and there's no branding of the camera maker anywhere on the body. Well, it does say France here in the accessory shoe with the serial number, and it says Foca here. But otherwise, you really wouldn't know the model name unless you knew to look on the shutter speed ring. So this is a fixed lens. This is a fixed lens rangefinder. It takes standard 35 millimeter film and gives you standard 35 millimeter negatives. And I point that out because sometimes camera makers would give you an odd size negative. And I don't know why, but some of them did. This primarily is an all metal camera. There might be some plastic in it, but I really don't think that there is. As can be seen, it's a very handsome camera. It was introduced in 1957, and from, I believe it was one, two, three. This might have been the fourth model that was introduced, with the original Foca camera coming to the market in 1955. The entire series ran through 1962. And there were two other Foca Sport cameras. Some websites have Foca Sport as one word, F-O-C-A-S-P-O-R-T. However, clearly on this lens ring, it does say Foca Sport II as well, three words, Foca Sport, and then Roman numeral 2. This is it's a moderately, I think it's really a nice size camera. It's not too large and not too small, and it doesn't have a heck of a lot of weight to it. It's pretty much where you would want to be for a camera that you're just carrying around, particularly one with a fixed lens, non-interchangeable. So let's take a quick look at some of the features of this camera. First of all, it had lever wind, convenient. This was the, here was your frame counter. Here's your shutter release right where you expect it. This is an accessory shoe. So this would be before the introduction of electronic flash. So that's why you just have an accessory shoe and it's not a true hot shoe. This is a little film minder, and I believe, it does have markings for ASA and DIN. So that's curious in itself. Up front here is a flash synchronization post, so that would really be for that time, bulb flash. And then you have your lens assembly. This camera uses a leaf shutter with speeds running from 1/300th of a second down to 1 second plus B. No surprises, although, for a simpler camera, it does have slow speeds. That'd be 1, 1/2, 5, 10. Well, 1, 1/2, 5, and then 10. Cameras who don't have slow speeds typically will be 1/25th or 1/30th on up to its top speed. Note that this had the older designation for film speed, for shutter speeds. The newer designation, they moved. It went from like 1/200, 1/1000th, then to 500, and then it halved each one roughly. The distance scale for this camera is marked in meters, and that's no surprise because it was intended for the European market and probably the French market. I don't know how many cameras they exported beyond France, beyond the French borders, but I just don't know. On top of that, it had apertures running from 2.8 down to down to f16. The lens used is a 45 millimeter or 4.5 cm, and the use of centimeters was typically used by German manufacturers before the end of World War II. And after the end of World War II, everything was converted to millimeters. You can see this is a coated lens, and so obviously this is a what we call post-war lens. That would be post-World War II. Maximum aperture, as I mentioned, is f2.8, and this is a 45 millimeter or 4.5 centimeter lens. It's an Oplar color. The maximum aperture of 2.8 would indicate that it's a Tessar type, and in fact it is a four elements in three groups. On the back, it's fairly simple. You just have your eyepiece. And so this uses a coupled rangefinder, and it's a fairly wide base rangefinder, particularly for a consumer camera, and probably one that was intended for more of the amateur side of the market. I don't know that Foca ever captured much of the professional market. In France, you probably could still get whatever German camera you wanted. Although I don't know what the import controls were. In certain countries, after World War II, there were strict limits on imports of particular cameras, and so there might have been import limits on German cameras. And this would be before Japanese cameras had really become the market, the heavyweight in the photography market. On the bottom, you have your tripod post, which is way over here on the side. You just have a blank thing here. Here's your rewind button. So your rewind button is once again a press and hold. So you'd press that in while you turn your knob. This knob does not raise at all. It's fixed in position. I mean, you cannot lift it away from the body. And so when it was time to rewind your film, you would press and hold this button and rewind this film by knob. It's a slow way to rewind film, but it had been in place probably for, by that time, a good 20 years. So everybody just sort of, it wasn't a surprise to most photographers. To open the back, it's a slide switch. Give it a firm push, and then the back slides off. This is, very European style to have the back removed. Later camera, I don't know if the later cameras had a hinge back. Possibly they did. I just don't recall. And I don't own a lot of Foca cameras, so I couldn't really tell you if that in fact is true. So in the back, it's fairly simple. You have a small roller here for the film. Help guide it across those across the sprocket wheel and such. Here you have your pressure plate, and of course the pressure plate's purpose is to keep the film flat against the rails as it travels from left to right. This is your take-up spool. There is a small serrated wheel here on the end that will help you load the film. There's really no other surprises in the back here, and it's very traditional. As I mentioned, this does not lift. The rewind knob does not move away from the body. Loading the film is pretty straightforward. Just put your new roll film in here, pull the leader across, insert it into one of these slots, and you can give it a start. Close the back or replace the back. Make sure it's fully seated, top to bottom. Close that. Push that switch to the right to make sure it's closed. And you'll notice it has F and O. Getting back to things. So after you did that, you would then have to reset your frame counter. And you simply, there's a small little serrated raised dial. You simply press and turn. Well, you don't even really have to press it, but you have to press down on it to get some friction with your thumb or your finger. Your thumb will probably work best. So once again, you fire off 2 blanks. I probably would set this to a faster speed when you're loading film. And you can see that when you advance the film, the frame counter rotates. See that? Watch. The leaf shutter on here is fairly quiet. It's not a loud leaf shutter, so it does allow you to, I think you could shoot indoors with this without it being very obtrusive. I'm trying to remember back to when I serviced this camera. I did have to clean up the viewfinder. I can't even remember how. I believe I removed this, and then of course I removed the rewind post. There probably was a small locking collar under here. Lifted up the top deck. I cleaned up the I cleaned up the viewfinder and rangefinder elements. Probably realigned everything. Reset the rangefinder to infinity, and I don't believe that I lubricated the lens. However, it does focus smoothly. You'll notice it has the old style all metal focusing ring, scalloped focusing rings with small serrations. There is a small tab. There is a small tab right here. But to be truthful, I don't think I ever use that when I focus. I just grab the focusing ring a bit at a time and turn it. One thing to remember is because the rangefinder is what we call a wide base rangefinder, that is the distance between these two windows is fairly wide. You do have to be mindful of that when you're holding the camera, because it's easy for you to accidentally do this. And you'll see it though right away. You'll see your finger intrude into the small rangefinder patch that's in the center of the viewfinder. When it comes to the viewfinder, it's really just a blank frame. There are no indicators in the viewfinder as far as frame lines or parallax or anything like that. When you shoot a camera that has no frame lines, you should shoot what we would call loose. That means don't do real tight framing right up to the very edge, because it's very difficult to say exactly where the frame begins, where the edge of the negative is, and where you place your subject. So I always tended to shoot a little bit looser, and then if you needed to, you could always crop the image. You can always crop the image. It's easy to do if you're scanning film, or even if you're printing, making traditional prints. You could do it in the darkroom. Here's what I want to explain between wide base and narrow base rangefinders. So here's two cameras, and so this one has, the Agfa has what we would call a narrow base rangefinder. If you look at the two cameras, the distance between here and here, these two, the center of these two windows is much, much narrower than these two. And so what's the advantage of a wide base rangefinder? Well, it gives you more accurate focusing. With this, you're really subject to being everything extremely, extremely precise, which it should be anyway. But it does make it more difficult to focus accurately when you have a narrow base rangefinder. So let's take a look and see how much the Foca Sport II weighs. Let's remove the lens cap. So the Foca Sport II weighs 1 pound, 4.2 ounces. So we could say 1 pound, 4 ounces. Less than 1.5 pounds. For the size of the camera, it's a nice weight. It's not too heavy to carry around most of the day, and I think that you'll find that even a 1 pound, 4 ounce camera, is reasonable for this particular model. I think we showed the Agfa Ambi Celette earlier, so let's compare that. See what that weighs. This one weighs 1 pound 9.8, so 1 pound 10 ounces. So the Agfa is, as you can see, quite a bit heavier. What, 1 pound 4 ounces, 6 ounces, 6 ounces heavier, and you can really feel the difference between the two cameras when you hold one in each hand. This camera has no meter, so if you want to know what your exposure settings are, you're going to have to bring along a handheld meter. But that's not that surprising. I mean, there were quite a few cameras sold in the 1950s on up through the probably the early to mid 1960s that did not have a built-in light meter. This particular camera came with a rubber lens cap. And it's it's a bit larger than normal, but it serves its purpose, which is to keep the lens covered and also protect the front of the lens. So, if it does happen to bang into something, it'll just contact the rubber lens cap. And because it is rubber, it can take a couple dings here and there, and you'll never even notice it. I found this camera pretty simple to use. I actually shot with this during the winter time, and I didn't have any problem with it. I believe the photos that I'm going to show, the photos that I'm going to show you, show me using it, I want to say in January on a sort of a slushy, snowy day. But you know what? I had a lot of fun with this camera. And that's how photography should be. At least for me it is. I've always tried to have fun with photography. I didn't shoot this on a sunny day, so I can't tell you, if this camera is flare prone. I would say it's not too much, even though this inner part is sort of reflective. Often you want that to be flat black, so it reflects as little light as possible. I suppose I could always remove it and take it downstairs and give it give it a coating of flat black paint, but I probably won't bother with that. It's a very well made camera. I would rate the construction of this to be very high. Choice of materials is good, and also the chrome plating of all the parts is very good because there's very little pitting, top, bottom, and it's just it's a handsome camera for being a fairly simple camera. I have seen some cameras in which there is a lot of pitting, so perhaps I just happen to have bought my camera from somebody who really took care of it. And that is true. One thing that you will often see is you'll see this covering lift away from the body. You'll see that on quite a few cameras and quite a few of the Foca cameras, or at least more than I've seen. You'll notice that this body style is pretty nice. The top deck and the body itself are slightly rounded corners, or I guess you call those maybe chamfered corners on each side. And everything is fairly smooth. There are no hard protrusions. I think they really did a nice job with this camera. I'm trying to remember if there were any French photographers that use this camera, any notable French photographers, and I want to say Robert Doisneau, Doisneau. I think he used the Foca, but he did different work. He both did fashion photography and then normal, everyday, so-called street photography. It doesn't really say what he used, but for some reason I thought I'd read that he used a Foca, so he might have used it once or twice. I should really take a closer look at that. If I were to have to sum up this camera, I'd say it's a very nice, friendly, easy to use, well, I wouldn't say compact, but easy to use, high quality 35mm rangefinder. It does require some photographic knowledge, but I think any rangefinder does. And certainly most film cameras today require some amount of knowledge of how to handle a film camera, but that's really a different topic. And so that wraps it up for the Foca Sport II, a French camera from the mid to late 1950s. If you want to buy one, I think you'll still find that most of them will come from France and surrounding countries. There are a few here in the U.S., but most of them are still going to be in France. If you like this video, please hit that like or subscribe button, or subscribe button. And if you'd like to see me talk about a particular camera in the future, let me know in the comments below, or send me an email at contact@camera-talk.net. As always, keep on taking photographs.